Good morning, everyone. Today is Monday, and Monday is the day that I thank you all for your support of the work that I'm doing, which I call the mission of the Masters. It by no means defines the mission of the Masters, but when I was having to think how to call this what it really feels like to me, that's what I feel like. I feel like I'm one of Master's little children out here doing my little best to plant a few flowers and nurture them till they blossom. Above all, for the joy of serving Him, and also in God, in my fellow man, as we're going to be talking about when we talk about the Sevaka vows today. So those of you who feel inspired to support this work, I am not wearing a microphone. That would have some effect on whether I could be heard or not. Could I be? I could be heard, but probably not clearly. Faintly. Should I start over? Or should I just consider that they can listen hard? Okay. So I also want to invite all of you who feel so inclined to support this work by either becoming a regular subscriber through Patreon or going to PayPal. And now you can go to PayPal and type in Mission of the Masters instead of just Asha Nayaswami, and you can find a way to donate there. There's also a link on my own website, Asha Joy. So thank you all deeply. Thanks doesn't begin to describe it, and it's not actually the right word, because that implies that that you're doing this for me. So if I thank you on behalf of Master for doing your part to support his mission in this world, which is a great, deep, and profound satisfaction to serve God and Guru in whatever ways we can. So let us now pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dear friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your presence within us and to know that everything we are doing is an expression of your living presence, animating us, guiding us, living through us. Help us to separate ourselves from this delusion of separateness that causes us to suffer so deeply. Loneliness, disappointment, confusion. All of it has its basis in this feeling that we are not, that we are alone, and that you are not always with us. Awaken us from this terrible dream, that we may know ourselves as we are, one with thy infinite bliss, now and always. Om. Peace. Amen. Well, my friends, we're continuing on the Ananda way of life from the guidelines of conduct for members of the Ananda order, monastic order. And we started, as Swami does, with the life vow, the final vow. And now we come to what we call the novice vow. What do they call it? They just call it the Sevaka order vow. This one is called the Sevaka life vow that we did before. So it used to be called novice, which was a traditional monastic word, which is like the middle stage. You come in as a postulant, which is to say you're just trying it out. You don't have any vows, you just test things out. Then you become a novice, which is one feels pretty sure that this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, but I need a little more grounding, a little more maturity, a little more experience. And the community needs to know me a little better too before it will feel it is appropriate for me to make a final life commitment. But the postulant, actually all the postulant and the novice are expected to live as if they were life members, because we're trying this out. So this is the vow that Swami wrote for the novices, and it's very similar to the life vow with a few notable differences. It's a little shorter. It begins, as the life vow also begins, by invoking the presence of God in all his forms: Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved, Great Masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, I bow to you all. So we know, again, right from the start, why we're doing this. I live in Silicon Valley. I live in Mountain View, Palo Alto. And it's a very nice area to live. I've lived here for decades, and it has many, many positive features. But even here, even in such a positive expression of the material plane, those who are really seeking God and are following a path of discipleship, we're just different. We don't have to consider ourselves superior. We don't have to separate ourselves in a sense of aversion necessarily to the world around us. But I think it's helpful just to know that taking a vow like this separates us. You know, we're bowing to these great line of gurus, and we're pledging ourselves with a very, very different objective than average people have. And what's perfectly natural and common in the world is just unnatural and not common for the devotee. And so when one takes a vow like this, one shouldn't think that, oh, it's just business as usual. One should think very deeply and profoundly that from now on, I live differently. I have a different set of priorities. I have a different inner compass, and I'm deeply committed to following that. So then we say, I offer my life, my service, and my devotion to God, to you, my line of gurus, and to the ray of the divine light that you represent. This is exactly the same as the life vow, except for one word. I offer my life, my service, and my devotion unconditionally to God, is what the life vow says. So now we just say that we're doing it, but we leave ourselves that little bit of breathing room. You know, Swamiji wrote this. I don't usually think of these vows in this direction. I usually start with the least, with the more temporary vow, and work up to the life vow. So we keep adding to it. This time we're subtracting, which I don't quite like the feeling of it nearly as much, because it sort of it's like damps down the energy a little bit. But this is specifically how Swamiji thought it ought to be explained. So we have that little bit of space. And when I decide that it would be exactly the way it would be, right now I know that it's conditional. Maybe, you know, I'll do my best, but I haven't absolutely promised everything. But then when we're a life member, we trust ourselves to know that the commitment is unconditional, that there's nothing that's going to come up that's going to cause me to hesitate on this. If I hesitate, I'm going to have to find a way around it. The novice is allowed to keep a little back, just for the sake of practicality, until I know how strong I am. See, this is what we're trying to find out. It's not how sincere we are or what we intend. It's just how strong we are. I was talking to someone about a situation I had to face in my life, and I said, you know, I did it that way because I had to protect myself. Meaning, it sounded good to say that I had this sort of power, but I didn't. This is the best I could do. And that's a very important part of spiritual growth. Now, I hear myself, I'm trapping myself in words that are not true. I've taken the life vow, but I had already taken the life vow when I'm saying what I'm saying. It's just, we have to trust God. We have to trust God deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's not easy to do. As I've said many times, the law of karma is draconian. It just, there's no exceptions to it. And the demands of the divine, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. That's how Jesus put it. He didn't say be good. He said be perfect. So we need to know that at least I'm not going to give up on that road to perfection. But here we're spared one word. We say, I promise, and it's still a promise, as a member of Ananda's Sevaka order, to live in surrender to God's will and to abide by both the letter and the spirit of the guidelines for the conduct of members of the Ananda Sevaka order. In the life vow, it's more about our relationship to God. I offer my life, my service, my devotion unconditionally to this ray of gurus and so on. So here he says, I will live, he's combining several paragraphs. The comparison gets a little bit confused, but we also promise to live in surrender to God's will and to abide by the monastic principles. Here we would say, as a member of the order, I was contemplating why Swami puts that in, because that line is not anywhere else. It's not in the life vow. We don't do it as a member of the order in the life vow. But now we're accustoming ourselves to what we're getting involved in. And I've often expressed to people, and it's worth knowing, you know, the Sevaka order is a real commitment to community. And so I'm presuming, because I've never heard Swami explain why he said it differently, I doubt if he thought about it. I think he just wrote what he thought was appropriate, because he tends to follow inspiration rather than analysis. But I promise, as a member of the order, because we're having to get used to this fact that we're joining a monastic order, and because so many elements of life can remain in place, marriage, family, career, educational pursuits, many of those realities can just stay in place. We have taken up residence in the community because the order only exists if you're a resident of the community. But we're also saying to ourselves in this initial vow, I promise, as a member of the Ananda Sevaka order, we're shifting our identity. Prior to this, I was a private citizen. I could live as I wanted. I could pick and choose what I wanted to do and what I didn't. But now I have joined a monastic order, a very specific one, and I will live in surrender to God and will abide by both the letter and the spirit. He adds that. It's not enough to have mere outward conformance. This he really wants the devotee to understand. It's not enough to merely look right. We have to also be doing it from the spirit from which it is written. And as I went through all of these sections over these many weeks, there are many aspects of being part of the Sevaka order and following these guidelines, which expands to following the Ananda way of life, that ask us to really examine and think about our lives differently. We have a commitment not just to ourselves, not just to God and Guru, but also to our brothers and sisters. Then it says, I dedicate myself to finding Thee, my God, and to serving Thee in a spirit of love through my fellow man. And now I talked about that saying a lot when I was talking about the life vow, and it's exactly the same here. So why would we join this monastic order in the first place? Because we have come to the point of understanding that life really has a very specific purpose, and that purpose is to find God. And once again, most people are not thinking that way. I don't know how they manage, but somehow they manage. And they fill their lives with sometimes with quite meaningful work, sometimes even with generous work. But it's just an end in itself. In the Buddhist tradition, they call it the wheel of samsara, the wheel of birth and death. I incarnate, I live a life, I die, I come back. And they just talk about the endless wheel of samsara. And in Buddhism, they talk about getting off the wheel, breaking the cycle. And that's what it is when I say, I dedicate myself to finding thee, my God, which is, there is a line in the sand. I mean, people often say, have said, they divide the world into two kinds of people, whatever those two kinds of people are. And the joke is there's two kinds of people, those who divide the world into two kinds of people and those who don't. When I was in India, in the first pilgrimage tour that we took, and we were with 30 Americans, and it was my first trip to India too, even though I was leading it, because I knew about the spiritual context. I didn't know the geography. But we were on our way to the Taj Mahal, and that's when our guide, who was appropriately was very proud of his country, told us that there were two kinds of people, those who had visited the Taj Mahal and those who hadn't. And we were about to become part of that elite second group of people who had visited the Taj Mahal. And I have to say, I don't think it was as life-defining as searching for God or not, but it was a notable experience that has stayed with me. Just to riff on the question of the Taj Mahal for a moment, inasmuch as I helped lead pilgrimage trips for like 20 years, and that was quite a few trips. I saw the Taj Mahal many times. And one time I went to visit, and as it happened, our pilgrimage group had about 6 or 7 men who were all construction contractors, builders. And I walked around the Taj Mahal with them, and I saw it really differently than I'd ever seen it, because they were analyzing the way the darn thing was built, which had never crossed my mind before. And you actually felt, oftentimes, saints have commented when they see tourists at notable locations, they'll be able to see through time and realize that, well, they're coming here to see what they themselves built. And I couldn't help feeling, walking around with those men who are all dedicated to finding God, that they had been there and they knew that building in a way that most people didn't know it. Who knows? It was fanciful, but it was certainly a moment that I remember. But it's very different. And it's interesting, and I don't mean this in a judgmental way, because the second half of the vow is to serve God in a spirit of love through our fellow man. But it's very interesting as an exercise in discrimination to be with people when they make decisions, watch people in public places, sort of tune in to what other people's consciousnesses are like, and then feel, how is it different if God is my objective? What do I do differently? And if it's not clear to you what one is doing differently, then meditate on it much more deeply. In every situation, the devotee, the member of the Ananda Sevaka order, has a question to ask. How will this serve you, Lord? How can I serve you, Lord? And how can I serve you in others? And what many people will just take as perfectly normal, ordinary behavior, it doesn't look the same to the devotee, because we're working with another reality. I have this ongoing battle, which I think this morning I have finally surrendered. I joined a particular YMCA because they blissfully did not play music in the gym, and they didn't play music in the swimming pool. They have an indoor swimming pool where I swim. And I have loved it. I've been swimming there for 20 years because it's quiet. But recently, that seems to be changing. Today the music was loud enough that even with earplugs and my head underwater, I could still hear it. And when I said something to the lifeguard about the music, he said, "Isn't it wonderful?" No, actually, I don't think so. the choice of music is not to my liking. But it was a very interesting moment for me because I've been fighting this situation for years. And I think I surrendered today, but I didn't surrender gracefully. And I just thought, how easy it is to talk about whatever God sends you is what you need, and how much inside of us, and for some reason this particular little squabble affects me on an emotional level that's way out of proportion to what it is. And I, to this day, I can't quite figure out why it disturbs my peace as much as it does. But nonetheless, there it was. And I had to think to myself, Asha, you're so privileged. You have so much in your life that's so wonderful. And you're actually allowing yourself to suffer because of the, dim assault, distant assault of this uncongenial sound. But there it is, But I'm dedicated to finding God and to serving God. And nothing is small, therefore, because everything that changes your consciousness has to be looked at from the point of view of where am I going? I think, what if I were in a prison? What if I were arrested? What if I were a sudden refugee, as millions of people are in the world? I'll look back on this and I'll be so embarrassed. And so we have to be realistic with ourselves, but we also have to be tough. We really do. We have to be tough. Not tough in a suppressive, angry sort of way, but we have to overcome all weaknesses, because we have to be ye therefore perfect, even as our Father in heaven is perfect. Many people have changed that translation. Be good, be uplifted. You find modern translations because they didn't know what to do with perfect, because they didn't have the benefit of what we have, to know that perfection is really possible. As a means of attaining self-realization, I offer my cooperative obedience. The life member pledges it. The life member commits. The novice member, it's a free will offering. I offer my cooperative obedience and loyalty to Ananda. That's the only difference. And to those members who are responsible for guiding the community in its various aspects, and above all to the living representative of the Ananda line of gurus, the spiritual director of the Ananda Sevaka order. So once again, and there's two strong paragraphs here. I'm not on my own anymore. And we say at the beginning of this booklet, commitment to a spiritual community is inconsistent with too great an assertion of personal independence. And for most devotees, that coming up against your personal independence, instead of having to cooperate with what others think is a good idea, that's a real line in the sand, if we have any spunk. I know there was this man, this was long before the Sevaka order, who was running a small group at some distance from Ananda village. And he was making lots of decisions on his own. He was making lots of decisions that were not entirely consistent with the way we were doing things, Ananda was doing things, but he was still calling in Ananda and using Ananda's energy and following Ananda's ways, picking and choosing among those. And it was a little, we had to sort it out. And Swami's response after he met the man and talked to him at great length and really tuned into where he was was, Swami said, even though such a person can cause trouble, meaning can make waves that have to be resolved, he said, anybody with any spunk is just going to go ahead and do what they think is right, rather than sitting around waiting to be told what to do. But in fact, in the end, what Swami said, since you're so determined to chart your own course, he said, I don't object to your doing it, but perhaps you should not use the name Ananda. And that was how the compromise was made, which is, I have no objection to what you're doing, but it's not exactly what Ananda is doing. So what we're deciding here is I offer my cooperative obedience. I want to understand what Ananda is doing. I want to find God. I want to serve God and my fellow man. I want to be dedicated to this line of gurus. But I want to live by the spirit and the letter of the guidelines for conduct, and I want to offer my cooperative obedience to those who are responsible. In other words, rather than asserting what I already know, I'm saying, I'm here to learn. I want to listen. It's cooperative obedience. It's not that I have to do it, but I want to learn. And that is like, you would think that would be so obvious, but it's so interesting how often we forget that. We just start standing for the principles that we have and we forget, oh yeah, I came here because I couldn't do it on my own and I want to learn. And that's what Swami's asking us to do, to study these guidelines as we've been doing all these days. Study these guidelines. Meditate on the different phrases, the different words, the different implications. Then meditate within ourselves, introspect. Am I living by that? If not, how can I? If I don't feel that I can, why not? Is it something that I should stand firm on? Or is it something that I should try to surrender? All these it's a minute by minute process. And there's no part of it that's small. Why I react so strongly to those people wanting to play music in the swimming pool, it's so out of proportion, I still don't know. But I'll keep asking the question. I've asserted my point of view. I have had no influence. It's time to surrender, but I have to surrender with joy. You see, that's without joy, we're only following the letter, and it's the spirit that really counts. And then the last line of this, guide me and strengthen me, Lord, in this my divine resolution to live always for Thee. The life member says that I live the rest of my life for God alone. This is the same vow, my divine resolution to live always for Thee, not for me. And then the joy of this is that we find out that living for Thee is the best way to live for me. I mean, it's kind of a joke, but not really. It's all about waking up to who and what we really are. Is this material world, this society we live in, the way God made us, we tend to see ourselves in a false light. And all our suffering is because we don't know who we are. And all of our sadhana is to be able to know, not merely as an idea, but as a springing from inside ourselves, allowing no possibility but the truth. That to live for Thee is the happiness that I've always been longing for. God bless you.